We understand the value of leading side by side in ministry, but do we really know how to do this well? That's the question we're going to talk about, so stay right there. Hey, welcome back, my friends. Welcome back to Learn Together episode. And I'm Sehi, and I'm super excited to talk about some things that are really important to us. You know, we all understand as female ministers, we want to support one another, but we are not the only one that are doing in ministry, leading ministry. We know that those who have the decision-making powers and authority are our beloved male colleagues, but sometimes it's really hard to get into their world, even though they are the ones that are really making tangible difference in this generation. So today I'm going to have a wonderful conversation with two awesome male champions. They're making a difference already, and I have just come to know these two names, but they've been doing this championing women in ministry for years. So first guest I have is Pastor Jean from Colorado, and I have another pastor, Pastor Rich, who is part of the EP National Executive Presbyter, and so he's going to be joining our conversation also to unpack this important issue. But so without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce to you Pastor Jean Roncone from Colorado, where my family is. How are you doing?
Yes, it is great to be here, and thank you for letting us be part of this process. And Colorado and Utah are big advocates of women in ministry. So thank you for involving us in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Jean. You are pretty new to the role, but I know that what I hear is that you are such good ally and advocate for female ministers for many years. So back in September 2021, you spearheaded this resource on female lead pastors to assist local churches to better understand the value of female lead pastoral ministry. So, and I think I heard it correctly. If I heard it correctly, there are like 6,000 shares or downloads in just 8 weeks, and that's phenomenal. And then I believe that AG supports women in ministry theologically, but when it comes to practicality, our belief don't always match our practices. And I think that's one of the problems that we, as women in ministry, we like to talk about it and try to just wreck our brains to figure this out, right? And I think you are going to be able to provide some insight into this. So tell us about the practical reasons and the benefits for considering women for lead pastors or any decision-making positions. What do you think, Pastor Jean?
Well, let me comment on the reasons first. For us, it was important to include that writing that you referred to was actually a new chapter in our pastoral search manual that we give to local boards. And I think the three reasons that drive us are theological, stewardship, and authenticity. And let me kind of comment on the theological first. As spirit-filled people, we've always been open to female leaderships. Serving in leadership positions, not because we're hip, but because our understanding of the supernatural gifts, as Paul says, that they are given as the Spirit disperses them, not by race or gender or social economic boundaries. And so theologically, it has always been a fit for us. I love what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 12:11, where he said, the Spirit apportions gifts to each one as he wills. And that includes gift of pastor, teacher, apostle, and so forth. So if God has given us these gifts, if the Lord has empowered the church with female leaders, we must use them to be good stewards of the resources that he has given us. So that's why I think we have to be actively deploying and training and embracing female leaders. And lastly, the third reason it's important is authenticity. Our theology of gender has to be authentic. And I think when we are investing, training, releasing female leaders in the context that you mentioned as lead pastors, it's living proof that, equality and inclusion isn't just a tagline for us. It's a value. So I would say those are the reasons. They could also be the benefits. I mean, you could turn that around, couldn't you,
Mm.
and say they're benefits. So to answer your second part of that question about benefits, I think the primary thing is we're increasing our capacity. I mean, we are widening and lengthening our leadership pipeline by providing opportunities for called and equipped women to serve in these areas. And so we're better able to empathize, we're better able to strategize, we're better able to mobilize females, not just in the pulpit, but in the pew as well. So that's important. And of course, expanding our potential. 51% of our population are females. And so we are just increasing our potential to reach our culture. So that would be my response to that question.
That's great. I want to go back to that authenticity piece because I think it's important for us to be authentic in our discomfort too. Because, even though theologically we have a really good egalitarian foundation, in practice, we are not experts in it just yet, right? We're still learning. And so just being authentic and recognizing, okay, I believe in the word of God, I believe in the good theology, but we're just learning. And I'm going to just try to die to my own culture, die to my discomfort, and being authentic in that
Yes,
process. I think that's so important. Instead of saying, "Hey, I got it together. Bible says that, so I should be perfect and know it all of a sudden." That's not the case. So having that grace toward each other, brothers toward sisters and sisters toward brother, I think that would be a good piece. Yeah.
absolutely. And lots of
Mhm.
things we have to revisit and rethink as we get further down this path. And I think it's courageous to do that. I think leaders are good. For instance, this past week, we asked one of our therapists who deals with all of our moral issues to give us some new guidelines on how we interact with female leaders. I think, the whole Billy Graham rule was awesome. It served its purpose, but I have a female executive presbyter that I have to meet with. I have to brief and
Yeah.
discuss with her. So it's these kind of things, as you're saying, that makes us more authentic as we go down this path.
That's so wonderful. And I encourage you, for those of you that are listening, to find a person like Pastor Jean. All you need is one person to help process these things. We may not have answers like today or tomorrow, but as we're conversating about these topics, that we may be in a better place than we started with. And so that's really encouraging. Pastor Jean, I also understand that these changes are difficult, but change in leadership dynamics must also take place from both ends. It's not just about
Mhm.
the top leadership. It's also not just about aspiring leaders, right? It's just both of us. It's just working together. So what are some things you've observed that are limiting the opportunities for called women to ministry? What are some of the limiting factors for them?
That is a great question, Sehi. And one of the things I love about your leadership is you ask great questions. And I would answer that on two different levels. If I could address the organizational leadership side first, and then the other side with female leaders. I think there's a number of things that we as leaders have to be intentional in doing. And I'll just rattle off a couple that come to my mind. And one is to use our influence. I am not a big fan of apportionment of a bylaw amendments that require a certain amount of any gender or any minority. I think that it undermines the value of female leadership. I think it paints female leaders in a box. I think it creates an impossible exit strategy that ends up hurting new minorities later on down the road. But I think our leaders have to be much more intentional than legislative. And for me, my experience has been from going, 2.5 years ago to having no female leaders on committees, presbytery, EP, to where we are now, where we finally have the exact same proportions of population. None of it has been through a bylaw amendment, not one policy change. It has been organic. And so what that has required me to do is to really be intentional as a superintendent, to get out into the field and find really sharp leaders and release them in their gifting. It's also required me to educate. That was the reason that we kind of spearheaded this paper you're talking about, so that we're educating our ministers, our lay people, other female leaders about the why of this issue. The why of this issue is what I think a lot of leaders aren't addressing. I think we need to protect female leaders, and by that I'll say, two things. I think we need to make sure that they are presented accurately, that they are understood accurately, and at times defend them from male leaders who may have a bias or a resentment, as well as sometimes on the other times having to sit down with overzealous female leaders and explain to them, you're hurting the cause right now. So you've got to protect on both sides. We've talked about training them. We have a cohort to train lead pastors this year. Half of that cohort was females, and I was so excited to see that without any kind of, it just happened. 2022 will be the first year in our network's history that we have more female ordination candidates than male. But a lot of this is, I think, legitimizing female leaders by investing them in a way that the system is more likely to nominate, affirm, and select them than some legislative process. So I think that is very, very important as far as using your influence as a leader, if that makes sense. I think I would throw in, it's not just influence, but getting out on the grassroots. We've engaged 20 new females in the last 2 years, and all of them say, I found on tours where I get in my camper and for 30 days, take one region, visit every church. And the most incredible female leaders are not the ones jumping up and down saying, look at me, look at me, look at me. But I mean, one of them was an investment, had a previous career in investment. I'm like, why isn't this person on our finance committee? Wow. But unless you get out of your office, you get out and get on the field, you don't know that these people exist. And then I would add, creating opportunities. If I can, is it okay to kind of be transparent and summarize my observations in my network? I'm not in other, but Colorado and Utah, I find that female leaders kind of fit in 3 categories. There is one, what I would call, the founders. These are females who, for the past 20 years, have been that strong, loyal, faithful female voice in our networks. Many times they are pastors' wives, missionaries, district office employees, and these people are not necessarily seeking executive leadership positions. They continue to be an amazing resource. They will continue to be that in the future. The second group is what I would call passionate activists. And this is a group that sometimes these females, they're almost more passionate about female leadership than they are their calling. I don't know that they intend to come off that way, but the perception is that. And so they are very passionate. They want to change systems. They want to change structures. But on the other hand, they represent parachurch ministries oftentimes, don't have a lot of local church experience or leadership experience. Many times their theological preparedness, their credential level, isn't even at the level where they can be considered by local church bylaws or these kinds of things. They can lack collaborative skills. They tend to be in ministries that are very autocratic, and they might not have that collaborative skill that you need in a local church. They are extremely passionate. Discernment is needed, but they are a force for good. The third category is what I would call hidden achievers. And these are women already serving in our local churches. They have already established credibility. They have already been effective. They've already grown ministries. They're not jumping up and down saying, hey, look at me, look at me. You're not going to hear them say, I'd like to be superintendent someday. But they are incredible leaders. And if you want to make a lot of fast traction in this area, these are the people that I really try to connect with, because they already have credibility. And we've been able to engage 20 of these. So I think we need all 3 of these categories, right? But that third category are people that you can really lean on, and they will represent women well because they've already done it on a local context. So that's kind of my take on what leaders can do. from that standpoint. And of course, there's also what can women do to help that as well.
Absolutely. Those are really good perspectives. I hope that this podcast is also heard by our male allies and male ministers, because your perspective is good. Because, oftentimes, okay, I want to go and look for women, but where are they? I mean, we hear that quite often. We don't find quality women. That's one of the reasons why women are not serving in the high leadership, is what we often hear. But you kind of said, like, we just go find out people, but you made it sound very easy, but it wasn't easy. In fact, you use a word intentional, but intentional in the organic way or in strategic way. You were organic by building relationship, but it was intentional. It just didn't happen, like, oh yeah, it just so happened, it didn't happen naturally like that. You intentionally went out, but it was organic. But it was also strategic, because you kind of look through that lens of, okay, who are the hidden achievers, who are the passionate activists, and who are those loyal founders. You had that good lens to filter and then maybe equip people that are not there yet, but then kind of guide them through to where they need to be. So that's really, really great perspective, Pastor Jean. Now, you were almost about to say this, and I think this is also important. Kadi Cole, in her book, Developing Female Leaders, talking about the sticky floor syndrome, meaning like these are some of the things that women do to our own selves to limit the opportunity. So that's the word, sticky floor, not a glass ceiling. Glass ceiling is something that we cannot break through on our own, but sticky floor is something that we do to ourselves to limit those opportunities. So let's unpack that just a little bit. Female leaders, what are some things that we need to do to be able to enter this leadership world and collaborate with our brothers?
That is a great question. And in my research for this paper, one of the things, Sehi, that really surprised me was in our fellowship, we have 37,000 ministers, almost 38. And out of that almost 38, 27%, 10,000 are female credential holders. Now, of that 10,000, let's break that 10,000 of females into three groups: certified, licensed, and ordained. So 2,200 are certified, 4,000 are licensed, and only 4,000 are ordained. So, I mean, out of all these leadership positions that in almost all cases, pulpit committees want an ordained pastor. If they have to choose, they want an ordained pastor. If you're going to be a presbyter, you have to be ordained. If you're going to be an executive presbyter in your district or network, you have to be ordained. So really only 4,000 women in the entire nation are even eligible. So another way to say this is 60% of female ministers have chosen not to seek a credential that wouldn't allow for them to have upward mobility in using their giftedness. So the number one thing that female ministers can do is advance their credential. Let's just say the 4,000 in the license just advanced one level to ordained. We would double the amount
That's true.
of ordained. And I remember talking with you about this stat a couple months ago, and you ran some figures and you said, oh my goodness, you would think that the amount who progress with men would be about the same with females. And you said, for some reason, females are not advancing. So I would say that would be number one. I think two, the second thing would be gain strategic experiences. And it opens doors and it gives leadership credibility to those around you. So I'm talking about, I'm going to just say a phrase grammatically that isn't real pretty, but lead pastor-ish, okay? Gain skills that are lead pastor-ish. So what are those skills? Number one, content creation. I mean, lead pastors, your entire job is preparing content, whether that's for sermons, teachings, writing small group curriculum. That's a skill in and of itself, to be able to create content to feed people's souls. Leading boards, that's a skill in and of itself. And so being collaborative, learning how to get a very diverse group of people moving in the same direction. I told my cohort this, a female children's pastor in a large church is much more qualified to be a lead pastor than a youth pastor, because a children's pastor works with every single age group. They work with adults, they work with children. They have to collaborate. So these are the kind of skills that I'm talking about. I think being mentored by an effective male mentor will give you instant credibility with people who haven't met you and don't know you. My goodness, planning churches, there is no faster route to respect in the Assemblies of God than planning a church. I mean, it is one of the hardest things to do, right? If you can plan a church, it proves you're current, you're gritty, you're strategic, you're effective. Results strip away gender bias faster than anything else. So I think female leaders really showing that they can grow things, that they can lead things on to the next level. And whether that's becoming an expert and being the expert in your network on that subject, all of these things are things that female leaders can do to increase the likelihood of them being in leadership positions.
Wow, so many things to unpack, and I'm pretty sure a lot of audience right now are just like taking a ton of notes. This is so great, and just so many different perspectives that you give. You're talking about how women are not unwilling, but we're not really advancing in our credential. I think part of it is that we're kind of comfortable leading from behind the scenes. So much so, like, oh yeah, I can preach without ordination. I can do, and maybe just not even able to see ourselves just being available for those kind of opportunities. So that number, man, if you're licensed, my sisters, and if you were going to just step up, the reason why I got ordained, I really didn't need ordination to do what I am doing, right? I can preach with license. I understand all of that. I can baptize people with license. I understand. But when I say yes to God for ministry, I wanted to say yes all the way. Like medical doctor, you don't want to just get an associate degree or bachelor's degree and say, I'm going to call it good, right? I have just enough skill sets. So you're going to go all the way with those kind of a degree, secular degree. So why not in God's kingdom? You're giving yourself to the ministry. So go all the way. And who knows, when you prepare yourself and the God can open divine doors. We can't even complain when we're not equipping ourselves just yet for that opportunities to come. So let's prepare ourselves for that. Pastor Jean, don't go anywhere. I know this is a wonderful conversation. This is like part one. We need to probably have a follow-up and unpack some more. But right now, I'm going to call up Pastor Rich from SoCal. And you guys know Nikki, right? Nikki State, who is behind this camera right now and making us look also pretty and professional. And this is her superintendent, SoCal. So let's call up Pastor Rich. How are you doing?
It's great to see you and be with you. I'm humbled and privileged to help you any way I can today.
Well, your voice matters, and thank you so much for your willingness to support this cause. And you are new to the EP, National Executive Presbyter, and so we're very excited that you're at that table as well. Yes. Well, we had such a great conversation with just Pastor Jean, and so I have some follow-up questions. But before that, would you like to give a shout out to your district and pastors and leaders there?
Well, I get to be a part of the best network in the nation. We now have 511 churches, almost 1,300 credentialed ministers. And before COVID, we had about 200,000 Sunday morning attendees. And so we still have a challenge. There are 25 million people that live in the SoCal network, and 17 million of them don't know Christ as their Savior. And so we are passionate about reaching people for Jesus and inspiring leaders and empowering the local church. That's our mission for the SoCal network.
Amen. We're so glad you're leading that network. Thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Now, Pastor Jean gave us the broader perspective on how to champion women in ministry. Now, let's talk about the details of two. It's critical for women entering a male-dominated leadership world to have some inside scoops so we can collaborate more effectively. So here's my question, Pastor Rich. What are some things that women do not know, but we need to know about the ministry leadership world? Any practical advice that can help women ministers to position themselves to be seen, heard, and accepted fully as co-laborers in Christ? What do you think, Pastor Rich?
Well, I'm a real champion of women in ministry. I was raised in Hispanic culture where women were highly respected as ministers. So it is something I've always known. but it is a challenge, because I think Paul writes to Timothy and he says, here's a trustworthy saying, whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. So the key is this your desire? Do you really desire to be in ministry? You know, if you can do something else and volunteer, God bless you. But if your desire is to be in ministry and being ministry in full time, I think that's important. I think regardless of your gender or ethnicity, I think the world is looking for three qualities of leadership today. The first is the ability to communicate a compelling vision. Do you have a compelling vision? Can you inspire people that would want to follow you? I think that is something that I am feeling. I have no authority as a superintendent, and I have no authority as a executive presbyter for the Southwest region of the Assemblies of God. But hopefully I have an inspiring vision that people will want to follow. I think that's what people are hungry for. They have lost hope in the things that they have put their trust in, but we have the hope of Christ. And if you are a female and you have an inspiring vision, God will raise you up and use you. Amen. Second is the ability to assemble and align a team to accomplish that vision. There are a lot of people that have vision, but they're trying to do it all by themselves. And you can't do it that way. Championships that we just saw recently are not made up of superstars, but of great teams. Mm-hmm. When I pastored, I could assemble a team. I just couldn't get them guys aligned. I couldn't get alignment. Yeah. And without alignment, you're not going to accomplish the vision. And I think that's a skill of leadership. That leadership is the ability and activity to influence people and shape their behavior. But management is the ability and influence of shaping people's behavior, but to accomplish goals within the organization. In other words, all managers are leaders, but not all leaders are managers. And I think if you want to be effective, you have to be both. Can you assemble a team and align them? What is hurting the church of Jesus isn't, I don't think, the attack from the outside. It's the disunity from the inside today.
Yeah.
So how can you assemble a team and can you align them to accomplish that vision? And the third quality that I think we have to learn is you have to manage conflict. Yes. Anytime you step into a leadership role and you try to change a culture or organization, you're going to face conflict. And either you manage it or it manages you. And I think a lot of people get discouraged. Recent studies say that 38% of all ministers in the nation are considering resigning because the conflict is so great. But I believe God has called us to discern the times and navigate through it and be effective in leading people to a walk with Jesus Christ. So those three qualities I think are essential. And I think that is what churches are looking for, regardless of gender, regardless of ethnicity. I am the first Hispanic ever elected to this position in Southern California. And it's not because I'm Hispanic. I think it's because people saw leadership quality and said, that's the kind of leader we're looking for to help us navigate 100-year-old district to become more efficient and more effective to reach this culture.
That's good. And that kind of goes back to what Pastor Gene was talking about earlier, that it's not about mandating by the bylaws or just having this ratio where people have to be there in a certain number of people of representation, because it becomes a tokenism rather than effective leaders being in the right position at the right time. I'm so glad, and I'm glad that you're not really talking specifically about women entering the male-dominated leadership world, because leadership is leadership. I think that's what you're trying to say, is that whether you're a woman or men or a person of ethnicity or different languages, you have a core key factors about leadership, which is to have a vision, to have a good team, and then to manage conflicts in a godly manner. Great wisdom. Now that leads me to the next question. As more women continue to join this leadership tables, which is across the board within the Assemblies of God, we have more opportunities to work and serve and fellowship with one another. Now, but that fellowship includes the opposite sex, of course, right? We just talked about that. As women are entering the leadership world, we're going to have more opportunities to work side by side. So what are some of the healthy boundaries, right? How can we recontextualize this Billy Graham rule that we just talked about earlier too? What are some of the best practices for cross-gender mentoring in the context of leadership development?
Well, I think we all need boundaries. I think that no one intentionally looks to compromise their values. They're just kind of slowly drawn into it. And so I think having clear boundaries, I think for years I followed the Billy Graham guidelines, but as Pastor Gene said, that because now we have so many of the opposite sex in leadership roles, how do you engage with them? I think
Right.
still you can build those boundaries by being in a place that's visible. All our doors in our network office are glass. So there's no one behind closed doors. I think you have to go beyond any kind of visual suspicion. Unfortunately, in the ministry today, it's like we're guilty until proven innocent rather than innocent until proven guilty. So try to be as public as you can if you meet at a coffee shop or at a restaurant or even in an office setting, so that there's a lot of visibility. And I think that the challenge is be agenda driven. I think if you have an agenda and stay that the conversation doesn't get more personal. I think people get in trouble because they relate really high spiritually together. Man, this person's passionate. They're committed. I mean, you're relating on a real high level spiritually, but you should have a real low level of physically and relationally. The problem is you start relating that high level personally or relationally. That's when there could be compromise, or once again, a foothold for the enemy. So it's great to connect with people very high spiritually, and by keeping an agenda, or let's talk about these 3 items, it helps in a private setting in not going off into more of a personal area.
Right. And I think people are kind of afraid to have this opposite cross-gender relationship, whether it is a fellowship, because fellowship is necessarily part of the body. And then you need to do that in order for us to grow together as leaders together, right? But there's a lot of stories out there talking about moral failures. So kind of realizing that that is the case, even if it may be the short portion of the reality, just having that awareness and just kind of finding solutions instead of avoiding it. Okay, so what can we do better next time? It just helps us to open more doors and kind of redefine this siblinghood and leadership in Christ. So I understand, when it comes to pastoring, I think that's a little bit different aspects as well. But when it also talks about leadership development, it's kind of like learning in the classroom, right? Whether you're a female professor or male professors, you have disciples of both genders and all nationalities and cultures. So kind of thinking through that lens of what is a purpose, like you said, right? What is your agenda? So having that clear goal, and I think fellowship should be an agenda part of it. Just you want to get to know each other. I think that's really cool. So
and I interact with a lot of female leaders, which I value.
Right.
What I do, a little simple exercise when I'm meeting with a female leader. Let's say we have an hour meeting scheduled. Right. My assistant will either come in or call in and at the 50-minute mark and say, Pastor Rich, your next appointment is waiting. I'm just giving. So the problem is, as I said, when meetings go too long, they can become too personal. And once again, if that person is talking and they think, "Oh, I got 10 minutes, I probably should get to the point."
Right. Yeah, right.
And so having fewer meetings often versus long meetings it would be better to do multiple meetings that way. So that's how once again I've built those kind of guidelines, and I think as a female leader even more so, that you can have some guidelines, some boundaries, that you can really be authentic. Can you really minister to that person, but you're doing it in a set time limit so it doesn't get too intimate. And I think then you can be effective that way.
I love it. And I think it's just understanding each person is different, right? And some people kind of grew up, maybe you never grew up with a sister, and so it's awkward to interact with women, other than your mom and I understand that. And everybody has a different levels of comfort zone. And so I think it's important for us to contextualize, even not just to have A, B, C, if you don't follow this, or if you follow this, you're right or wrong, but understanding that each woman and men come from a different cultural background, and they have but then our goal is the same, to honor God, to equip this body of the believers and saints and leaders. So if we can have that goal and figure it out however it looks, that's both honoring to God and just keeping each other's integrity, I think we can find a way, but it will be a process. But hey, Pastor Rich, you're here, Pastor Jean is here, and so we're very hopeful. I'm going to invite back Pastor Jean as we're wrapping up this incredible conversation. I do believe that we're going to have follow-up series on this. And hey, ladies and brothers, if you're listening to this podcast and if you feel like, okay, I have these questions and they have not been answered yet, why don't you just kind of put it right down, and we may just kind of look those over and maybe just consider that for our follow-up episodes in the future with our more male champions and allies. So as we conclude, I would like to give Pastor Jean and Pastor Rich an opportunity to give us a final thought on this issue of equipping female lead pastors. What do you say, Pastor Jean?
Man, my favorite line on this issue was from Beth Backus. I brought her in to train our presbyters. She's planning a church in Washington called The Table and was a credential specialist. And after the podcast, I said, Beth, you have such a great balance between being a female leader and a female advocate. How do you keep that balance? She said something that stuck with me till today. She said, I make sure I remember that I have a call, not a cause. I love that. Beth's the kind of leader you walk away and you say, that's a good leader without any reference to gender. So that would be my quote if I was going to sum it up.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and Beth is a part of our national team. She is a stellar leader. Yes, absolutely. Pastor Rich.
Well, I believe that vision isn't taught, it's caught. By having a relationship with people who are visionary leaders gives you the ability, I think, the God-given ability to have vision for your ministry and your future. I was with a group of young ministers recently, and they said, man, you're so wise. And I said, the more I listen, the wiser I look. And I think when you start out in ministry, you have the answer for everyone. But I think the ability to listen, compassion without empathy is just sympathy. And so we can be compassionate without really helping unless you have empathy. and you put yourself in that person's shoes. And that comes through being an attentional listener to the people who come to you or the people you're trying to learn from. And I think that is what I try to do. I try to listen to people and try to practice empathy, not just sympathy. And I think that is something that I want to continue to be more effective at.
Wow. Thank you, Pastor Gene. Thank you, Pastor Rich, for your stellar, incredible, humble leadership and example. You two are truly visionary leaders we want to emulate after. Thank you so much for being door openers for us. You guys are inspiring. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining our amazing conversation. And don't go just yet, because Crystal has some leadership 2 cents she wants to share after this conversation. Pastors, thank you so much, and God bless you. We love you guys.
God bless.
As we grow as next level leaders, we are often invited to serve on teams or to sit on tables or to work in ministries that there is a leadership culture that's already been created before we get there. And so part of the learning is learning and understanding the leadership culture that already exists. But I also think it is important that we have our own leadership ethos that we bring to the table. So not only are we learning what's already there and what's already established, that's called contextualization, but that we also bring distinctly who we are and who God has made us to be. And one of the things that I have really studied, one of the tools that I've put in my tool belt as I am growing into being a next level leader, is the concept of being a servant leader. There are many different leadership structures out there, but I think the one that most closely aligns to the way Jesus led is the way servants, as to lead as a servant. I remember sitting around a leadership team, and the leader looked out and said to everybody sitting there, he said, you are more important than the mission. And that spoke something to me. People are even more important to the mission. And part of the leadership structure of servant leadership is understanding that people are more important and more valuable than even the mission that we accomplish. And bringing out the best of those we serve alongside is a part of the mission. And so no matter if I'm leading a table or if I'm a member of a table, I always keep that servant leadership principle in the back of my mind, that people are more important than mission. And how can I bring out the best of those I serve alongside? May God bless you today, and may He give you courage and boldness to step out into next level leadership.